So this talk it's not a talk, it's a roundtable, which means we're all going to participate. It's not mandatory, but we can all jump in and share our thoughts on tools for making and supporting indie games. It's good for programmers and for those who will be using those tools. Visual artists, writers, audio-visual people. So it should be applicable to anyone who is involved in the game making project. So a quick note about me. My name is Tony. I run a tools company called Pixel Crushers. We make tools for Unity, including the dialogue system for Unity, Quest Machine, Love 8, Scene Streamer, Grid Controller, and others. So you can find all of our stuff on the Unity Asset Store. And here's a small list of some of the games that use our tools, including Disco Elysium, 1000 Times Resist, Citizen Sleeper, etc. So the topics we're going to talk about today are what kind of tools are needed to make indie games, what makes a useful tool, how to support and maintain a tool, because unlike games where you make it and then it's basically done unless it's like a live service game, tools often last across multiple games, maybe even the whole lifetime of the studio. So they need to be designed, built, and maintained to last for years and years. And then for those who are interested, we'll have a little bit of time at the end. If you're interested in talking about tools as a business, rather than tools for your own studio or your own projects simply to make your own internal games. So, let's talk about what kind of tools are useful for game dev. Has anyone made or used tools other than, say, a game engine, something maybe built on top of or supplemental to a game engine to help build a game project? Yes.
Yeah, there's some tools I use for like building my game in Unity called Super Unity Build, and I also used an engine called Ink pretty extensively, which is kind of like halfway between a tool and an engine since it fits into other engines for dialogue and stuff.
So, Super Unity Build, that it's used to like build executables?
Yeah, it's basically like a one-click automated pipeline.
Okay.
Yeah, I've extended it a little bit for us internally.
Okay, and for those who aren't familiar with Ink, that is a writing tool for writing like dialogue and other related text. You gotta...
Yeah, we also use Ink.
Okay.
And we actually made some tools for in Ink that will like parse out through parts of the JSON and let us like trigger events in Unity without having to like do quite as much work as it takes by default. It'll like auto-populate events into the inspector and like automate some of that process.
Oh, that sounds useful. Okay. So yeah, automation is a huge area that's ripe for tool making. Others, like Ink, creating and managing content. So I'll add those to the list here. But when you're either designing a game or maybe analyzing user data or the performance of a game, there are useful tools for that, like analytics, heat maps, things like that. So we can list those. Ultimately, the purpose of all these tools is to help you devs make your games more quickly and more reliably. The most painful thing I can see is when devs are doing the same repetitive steps over and over manually, and more often than not, like forgetting some of the steps in like a multi-step checklist. So the more you can like automate something and just make it one click and it does it with some validation in it, the faster your whole game dev process is. It isn't just like reducing stress, but it's also making sure that all those steps get covered and everything is as reliable as possible. So, let's talk about how to make a useful tool. One thing I want to really emphasize here is the tool itself. You know, you might feel like, oh, you know, there's some cool tech that I'm making. That's beside the point. The tool is not the purpose of making the tool. The tool is there to help your fellow developers get the game out and get the game out solidly and quickly. So you want to focus not so much on like, making a cool technology, but what do your users of your tool, that is your fellow devs in most cases, what do they really need to make their workflow pleasant and efficient? So does anyone have any thoughts or examples on ways they might have done this in the past, or pain points that they're experiencing right now? Yes?
I mean, this kind of goes back to the previous thing, but one tool I've enjoyed using as I've started C++ development without an engine is STL.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it stupid easy to make a window for your games.
Oh yeah, yeah. So makes it makes it a tool that you enjoy using, other than like abstracting some lower level stuff.
I mean, in a large part it is kind of that. Its name, Simple Direct Media Layer, helps handle a lot of that low system interaction that isn't the focus of what I'm trying to do. So it lets me get to that more important stuff more quickly.
Great point, great point. So let's say you're going to, this talk isn't so much about using tools, but rather about building tools for your group, your team, your studio, and how to best go about doing that. So my thoughts are, don't think like, oh, I want to make this tool because the tech is cool, but what does my team really need? So the first step, you want to like listen, and if you can, just like sit next to your artist or your writer and watch them, quietly even. Just watch them, see what kind of like stupid things they're doing, because they either don't know that there's a more efficient way, or because there isn't a more efficient way, and that's just the way the game engine or the library is forcing them to work. So the very first step you want to do is not write any code, not do any design of your tool, just watch how painful it is for your fellow devs. You might have a writer who's just going through these awful steps in order to get content into the game. Or you might have an artist who has this like long checklist written down on paper that is just has all kinds of like awful manual steps. And if you can figure out a way to automate that for them, or do some validation for them, it'll make their lives much easier, which makes your life much easier, because you won't have to go back and like fix all the bugs that they introduce into your shared project. So make a note of what works in what they're doing and what's frustrating. And you can, I really, if you can be there in person with them, sitting next to them quietly, you can tell from their body language. Like, you can tell like steam starts to come out of their head. This is frustrating, and that's what you want to fix for them, because everyone should be having fun making a game. Also, find out where they're really trying to keep more than one piece of information in their head at a time. Like, let's say in ink, that's a great example for a tool that you mentioned. A writer might have to keep like a lot of knots and stitches and variables and all that information in head. Those are different text elements inside an ink story file. But if you write a tool that helps them offload some of that out of their memory and into some automated process, they'll be more free to be more creative and make better writing and better games. Also, as you're doing this, it's okay if you don't necessarily ask them what they're doing and why they're doing it, but you ask them, what do you call this process? What do you call this thing that you're doing in your art program? Because you might have some like highly technical term for it, but they might have some term like scribble drawing. And if you're making a tool for them, you don't want to force them to use your like super low level technical term. You want to use the terminology, the vocabulary that they are using. And so I'll just quickly go through these others here. You ask, why are they doing what they're doing? Look at the existing solutions around that. Like maybe they're writing their dialogue, just taking dialogue as an example, in a plain text file, because that's the tool that they happen to be using, and you know that something like ink or Artisy Draft or Artweave would be a much better tool. You look and find out, well, maybe they like writing a whole lot of text that just flows as prose. So they're that type of writer. If that's the case, then a tool like ink would be good. But maybe they're the kind of writer that likes lots of branching dialogue, and they want lots of nodes with arrows pointing to the different options and different logic within their dialogue. In that case, a different tool might be better. So once you've identified their pain points, look at the existing tools that are around. You don't always need to reinvent the wheel, but sometimes you can find a wheel that works 90% of the way, and then you write a tool that works on top of that to bring it to 100% and make your fellow devs happy. Once you've collected all that information from them, then ask them. So don't talk to them until then, but then ask them, like, what would they like to do that they can't do right now with their current tool? Notice you haven't written a line of code yet. So gathering information is like the hands down most important thing that you want to do. And then when you make it, I recommend just make it on your own first. Hack in some data. You don't necessarily need their data. Just get it working, and then play test it with them on a side project, not in your main project. Now, does anyone have any experiences that they'd like to share about gathering information like this, making tools, and any advice that you want to share?
One thing I would add to this is also use the tool. Use it through the process that the artist or the content creator is doing too, like eating your own dog food. And then just make sure it works and it's not frustrating for you too. I think that I've seen a lot of tools develop that hasn't happened, and they're less useful for that.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite words when it comes to tools development is dog fooding. Never push something on someone else unless you've really used it a lot yourself. But you also don't want to make something that you're comfortable using, but your actual users aren't, because maybe it's too technical or doesn't use the right terminology, so it's confusing to them. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? So, go ahead.
The customer is not always right? Like sometimes along the listening and watching, I think is even more important than sometimes asking, but asking clear questions. Because I've had a lot of people say, like, I just want it to work faster or work better. And it's like, okay, but what does that actually mean? What does that look like to you? So sometimes what I like is asking, let's visualize it. Almost like sketch a little UI. Like, what does it working look like for you? Because that helps, I think, put them in a perspective of actually using it and really give them something that they want versus just trying to make something stronger, faster, better.
Good point. Now, as kind of a counterpoint, sometimes I found that end users will design what they think you want them to design. They'll be stuck in a certain mode that they've been used to. And if you can really step back and look at what their actual pain points are, you can find a compromise where you're doing what they really want to do and maybe break them out of these awful habits that they've been forced to develop because they haven't had the right tooling yet. So yeah, definitely the customer ultimately knows best because they're the ones who are going to be using the tool. Work with them to find that area where you're really addressing the root of their frustration.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Oh, did you have something?
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Start small. My board is a great place to start, like you said. Just sketch something out, build a little bit of the tool, get some feedback, dog food it, and just keep growing the tool. Because tools, unlike games, as I mentioned before, will last for years and years if it's a good tool. A lot of studios have level building tools or writing tools that they just use across all of their projects. Or a library like SDL, they use it in everything. So, yes?
Point of clarification, when you say dog fooding, do you mean using your own tool in the sense of eating your own dog food?
Exactly, yeah. Exactly as he mentioned there.
I think it was like an advertising term originally, but
It's catchy.
Yeah.
it's memorable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, companies use it, at least some companies use it for like their internal version testing. So like they'll release it internally to customers. Like Microsoft does that a lot for a lot of their software. Like you'll have like the team's dog food version versus the actual release version. So it's kind of like an internal release model.
Although I do feel strongly that once you have a release version, you should always be dog fooding the release version, because that's the version that your actual users are going to be using.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on designing and making a tool? Because once you've done that, you need to actually get them to use the tool. So has anyone had any either good experiences getting users to like adopt a tool, or on the other end of the scale, resistance to using a tool you put together? Something you've said, well, all right, this is going to make your life so much better, but they refuse to touch it.
Yeah, I have some experience with the latter, especially if there are, you're in a larger setting, if there are 1,000 different tools, because everybody's made one, or you have a huge backlog, right? You have this whole library, and it's really hard to get people to decide, like, I want to try this when they have all this other work that they have to do, and their work is complicated, right? You only have so much mental energy. Learning a new tool is a really difficult thing to get somebody to do when there's all these other options that are not maybe as good as the one that you've provided, but they're good enough to make it not worth, in their mind, right, taking the effort to learn to use the specific one.
Have you been able to overcome that in any way?
Yeah, so one of the things that helps is making documentation or something like some kind of guide that can walk you through how to use that tool. Ideally, not just a lot of text, right? That's just like, it can do this, and it can do this, and it can do this, because that's the same thing, right? It's a whole lot of text to read that can be exhausting.
Yeah.
But if you can show, like, here's a little 10-second video that shows you how this thing is way faster when you do it with this tool versus if you had to do it yourself, or even just, some screenshots or something like that, something that you can really easily parse through and go, oh, I see how I can get some benefit out of this.
Excellent point, yeah. So make it easy to learn, make it easy to adopt. I have a couple tips here. I'll show these and then we can discuss them. One is your other devs, your customers in this case, won't use a tool if they don't feel confident using it. If maybe the tool's a little bit janky, or they're not sure that it's going to like erase their data or something, or if it's processing an ink file, maybe it won't pick up all of the stuff that it promises to pick up. So that's why you dog food your own stuff to make sure it works. If you have some way of not only internally in the tool validating any kind of data that you're processing, but sending that back to the user, to your fellow game devs, to let them know, hey, everything is good, then that'll give them so much more confidence that the tool is actually working. For non-programmers, there's often a lot of worry about like, am I using the tool right? If you give them some kind of validation that yes, you're using the tool right, it's not a black box where you hit a button and it just says, okay, done, but rather it says, this is what we did and it worked successfully. That really gives them a lot more confidence to use the tool and explore the tool. Again, prioritize, make sure that the data is reliable. If you're working and manipulating with data, do autosaves. That's like save multiple versions so that they can go back. Make sure there's some kind of tie-in to version control so that if they do screw something up, or if your tool screws something up, you can go back to an earlier version. And for some of these tools, like there are editing programs, let's say Photoshop, that are not multi-user. Only one person can edit an image at a time. But if there is a tool, very often ink is written in like a big text document. And if you're using something like Google Docs that's multi-user, you can have multiple users in that document at the same time, and you don't get conflicts when you try to merge it all together because it's all just one multi-user file. But if it's separate copies of the same text file that each writer is working on, that becomes a mess when you're trying to merge it all into one definitive version. So if you can make a multi-user version, do so. It's going to depend on how much time you have and what your available technology is, but that saves you a lot of headaches in the long term. And most importantly, for any tool, give them a way to easily undo anything that they've done. So it shouldn't be like you hit a button and it has turned their precious image into another image, and there's no way to get back to the original image. Can you imagine a program like Photoshop without undo? Or heck, like a word processor, where you can't undo what you've typed. So always, number one priority after making sure that the data is good is making sure that they can undo. And frankly, if your data does get screwed up and they can undo it, maybe that's not so bad because if it does screw up the data, they can undo it. Also, as you mentioned, a lot of adoption comes down to how intimidating or what the learning curve of a tool is. If you can hide away most of the details, give them just like a high-level view of what it's going to do without a ton of little settings and everything. Do that. Like, take care of 80% of everything that they need to do with just like one button. And then for that 20% of little settings and tweaks, give them a menu for that they can dig into if they want to, but they're not forced to go into that just to use the basics of the tool. Another thing that helps with a lot of tools is auto-completion. So rather than, let's say it's a data entry tool of some form, like you've made a form that your content creators can use to define items in your RPG, in your role-playing game. Swords, magic potions, and they can fill out this form with like the name, the image for the inventory UI, the description, and maybe what slot it goes into. When you design this form, if you can make it so that they start typing something, especially if it's pulling from an existing database, like different types of items, potions, weapons, armor. If they can start typing something and then it gives them the option to autocomplete, maybe they only hit W and then they can complete it to weapon. It'll speed up their workflow and it'll also let them know that weapon is a valid thing because it's auto-completing for them to a value that is recognized by your tool. Similarly to that, again, I found that a lot of users prefer search bars, especially nowadays, to like these deep nested menus, because you can't see, other than the current menu that you're on, where you are in this nesting. There might be this huge nested list of options, and maybe you're looking from one all the way down in the tree of menus on one side, but you go down the other side. It's really frustrating and hampers the ability for your users to adopt the tool that you've made. But instead, if they can just kind of like type a rough idea of what they want to do, and then it finds the option for them, so much easier. And getting to your point about tutorials and videos and text, I found that when you make a tool really intuitive, and that's listening and watching what they do, dog fooding and getting feedback, that's the best way to get them to adopt the tool, because they can be like, oh, I look at this, I know exactly what to do. There are going to be cases where you can't do that, so then add tooltips. Tooltips are a lot better than documentation because it's right there in the tool. Then if you have to, you do documentation of various sorts. Videos are very often best, but find what your users really prefer to do. Definitely those walls of text are the worst way to try to get someone to adopt the tool. So if you can make links to those videos in the tool, where maybe you have a little help button or a question mark, and next to an option, click that button, and it brings up the tutorial video. It's not as good as a tooltip, not as good as just intuitively knowing what the tool does, but it's a lot better than having to move over to a browser or a printout and look up the documentation. So ultimately, in my mind, you want the tool to be fast and easy to use correctly, hard to use incorrectly. Does anyone have any experience with like tools that are especially easy to use or especially hard to use, or tools where they had good adoption or not so good adoption? And any thoughts about that? I know I talked a lot here, but I want to hear from you guys.
I've had, in terms of version control, there's obviously GitHub, which can be scary for some people who aren't that familiar with it. They're certain that they'll mess up their files, which can be an easy thing to do with GitHub if you don't know where you should be pushing and pulling things to.
Yeah, I have to agree with you 100%. Non-programmers in particular, their talents, their experience is typically elsewhere. And if there is one tool that trips up most people, it's got to be Git. Does anyone have any solutions for that?
Perforce.
Okay, that's yeah. I mean, yeah, evaluating different tools is a great way.
For different purposes, but like Git for game source controls can be problematic. So
I think even if it's, let's say, a text game where you don't have a lot of like large binary files, Git can still be quite intimidating.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there's issues if the team gets big too, with people overwriting or squashing files that somebody else needs. So it can become an issue. But that's different than the tool, maybe. But yeah, it's troublesome. Like even downloading compiled binary from Git can be, if you're a non-programmer, I'm mostly a non-programmer, it took a while to kind of get over that hump.
Yeah, I hear you. We have one comment over here.
I was gonna mostly agree with him. But yeah, I think the other thing that's nice is if you can abstract away the importing Git commands and make it as simple for that type of user and give them a special tool just for their type of uploads. We've seen that in some of the industries I've worked in, where it's like, okay, this person needs to just do this, that's all they're doing, we're going to extract that away, we're going to hide it, it's a button for that, right in the UI button, there you go, done. So,
Yeah.
abstraction.
We'll get Ezra over
Yeah, I
here.
was just gonna say, it gets an interesting example of like all the things we were just talking about, because there's so many different versions you can use. Like I've used the command line, I've used Git desktop, I've used Git fork, and like they'll show different things, and like you were saying, like have different sort of easy to use correctly options and like different visualizations, and it really changes how it feels to use it. Like I know some artists who like will only use GitHub desktop, will refuse to use the command line, because it's confusing, intimidating.
Okay. What do you all, before we get to more questions, since we're on Git right now, what do you all feel about asking a team to standardize on like one application, unless they're like a power user, like your programmers might use the command line, or they might need to use the command line to fix things, but what are your thoughts on like asking the entire team to always use, say, GitHub desktop app? There's some advantages because you can write a set of tutorials, record some videos that just use that tool that everyone can refer to, but there are disadvantages too. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it can be kind of difficult, especially when, again, I mean, even going back to your first slide where it was like, you ask and listen to what they need. A lot of times people develop their own workflow, and forcing one application, although it probably would have been better to start to do that, in hindsight is often hard and often causes, some disagreements in the company. So it can be very challenging, I'd say that.
I hear you. And the nice thing about tools is that, maybe you can, for the current project, get a few people to adopt it, and then in the next project, the next game, you can onboard everyone and eventually standardize.
I wanted to contribute to the GitHub discussion a little bit. GitHub is flawed, but it's the best that we have right now. I think there's certainly space, speaking of tooling, not to the extent that version control applies, there's certainly space to develop a better version control.
Yeah. And I believe you had something? Yeah.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. All right, well, did anyone else have any thoughts about getting your actual users to actually use the tool?
Yeah, to add on to what you're talking about auto-completion, another sort of in the same vein that can be really useful is presets. Because you're talking about making RPG items or something like that. If there's something that someone will have to do within the tool over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
You're making 700 weapons for this game. Well, if every weapon has the weapon type and it needs to have these stats added to it and something like that, make a little preset in there that's like, start with that. And that even further takes some of the having to do all that repetitive work within the tool out of it. And then, you can just fill in the name and the things that need to be different about that specific one.
That is an excellent point. I'll give an example from one of my tools, the dialogue system for Unity. Early on, we did not have templates for conversations. So when you talk to a lot of NPCs, like quest giver NPCs, there are fairly standard branches that they go down. Like if the player doesn't have the quest yet, you offer the quest. If the player is currently working on the quest, you go down a different branch that says like, hey, what's the status of this quest? And if they've completed it, you have a turn-in branch of the quest. So we had users who were just rewriting the same branching conversation tree structure over and over. And then we introduced conversation templates where they could define a starter template. They hit the button, they get a quest conversation, and then they could fill in all the text and move nodes around and add nodes if they needed to. But it was just a huge time saver. In Quest Machine, we have quest templates, structures like find the magic sword, do this one thing, then this, and then talk to the quest giver to turn in the quest. So you have your structures of these quests, and that way they don't have to redo the same type of thing again and again. So, anyone else on getting people to adopt? Yes.
I feel like making it look easy and useful, you don't use like CLIs or anything. So like if you're making tool in Python, you can use something like Streamlit.
Yeah.
Which is like a super simple web UI that looks pretty decent and it's very easy to use for tools that are not technical.
That's you bring up just a really great general point there. Browsers provide a lot of UI functionality. You don't always have to implement your own UI. You can use CSS and HTML and do everything on the back end, but have all the UI with tooltips and everything right in a browser. Everyone knows how to use a browser. Okay, so the next to last topic that I want to discuss with you all is support and maintenance. Because, like I mentioned, tools last across multiple games. So when you make a tool, you want to think hard about what terminology you're using. Get that terminology from your users. Don't make it up on your own. Figure out what data you need to work on the back end and what paradigms of data and actions your users are thinking in. So you might think on the back end, conversation trees or something like that, but on the front end, your users are thinking in a completely different way. Present the tool to them using the structures that they have in their mind, not yours, even if on the back end you're doing something different. Keep in mind that even if you finish a game, you might need to go back to that game 5 years in the future, and maybe put out a patch because Unity introduces a flaw in all of their versions of, or reports a flaw in all of their versions of Unity. Or maybe you get a deal to build your old game on a new console. So you want to make sure to try to keep your tools backwards compatible with existing projects. And a good way to do that is to, if you can, and if it doesn't impact performance, keep everything in some kind of text like XML or JSON or even plain text, rather than some proprietary binary format. Because this is just internal stuff for the most part. So it doesn't matter if it's maybe a little bit slower in most cases. And going the opposite direction, if you're moving to a new game or a new platform or something like that, you may need to take your data and upgrade it to a newer version. Maybe dialogue system again is a great example. I am currently working on version 3 of the dialogue system for Unity. One of the biggest complaints that we've had with version 2 of the dialogue system is that all of the conversation data, all of the conversation trees are in one big file. And that's mostly due to the way Unity works. If you're familiar with scriptable object assets, the dialogue database is a single scriptable object asset. That has worked well for medium-sized games and for largish games. When you get enormous games of the scale of like Disco Elysium, where everyone has everything to talk, or Tortured Hearts, which has like 500,000 words of dialogue, that database gets really slow to manage. So we are splitting out each individual conversation tree into their own separate asset that's linked from a master asset. So in that case, we need to be very careful about having our tool able to take that single big database and upgrade it to this new version without any kind of data loss. So, yes.
How do you do that? Because it seems like a really hard problem to solve, especially if you potentially need to support like multiple new versions that are backwards compatible with like multiple old versions and upgrading them all. How do you handle that?
Sometimes you just need to make a decision. Like in this case, we are going forward compatible. You can upgrade your single database to the multi-split out conversations, and the tool will be able to use the old database and work with it, but it can also take advantage of splitting out the conversation. So we are giving that some thought, just because we know some people will have old projects. They want to use the features in the new version, but they don't want to upgrade their database. So again, that is data reliability. Yes?
This is a question of what you work with. I actually have your tools, so I didn't check.
Oh, thank you.
What file type do you guys use?
So, the dialogue system is really big, and that is a great question. Internally in the game engine, in Unity, it is a single scriptable object file, which means that it's encoded in a text format called YAML. But we can also import and export from other formats, from CSV and Excel format, which is not great for branching dialogue, but it's okay for linear dialogue, but also importing from external tools such as Artisy Draft, Ink, Twine, Arcweave, and a dozen others. So we need, a big part of the tool is all these importers that read this data from different formats. Arcweave uses a special custom JSON format. Artisy Draft uses a custom XML format. So we read those in and then reformat it into the Unity scriptable object format that uses YAML text. Did that answer your question? Anyone else have any thoughts about just the maintainability of their tools?
Yeah, I was curious, like, what programming design patterns do you find yourself use the most, especially in terms of, like, for instance, you do a lot of Unity tools. How do you decide what design pattern to use when you know that, oh, I have to do scriptable objects because I'm going into Unity, or I have to work with what Unity is using? I'm just curious about your thought process there.
So our tools get used by writers, and I'm really happy that people who have never picked up a game engine, ever done any programming, have maybe just played a few games and been inspired to make one of their own, have been able to pick up tools like the dialogue system for Unity and without any programming, make a game, and make a successful game at that. But we also have a lot of teams with experienced programmers who really want to get down into the nuts and bolts. So for them, I make sure to use as many standard design patterns and architectural patterns as I can, so that it's very easy for them to be familiar with the patterns and paradigms that the code is using. For instance, the runtime of the dialogue system uses the MVC, or model view controller architecture, which separates out the model, that is the conversation tree, the logic of following it down and maintaining variables like, oh, did the player talk to this NPC? Did they complete this quest? That's all on the data side, not presented to the user, it's the back end. And then we have the view, which is the user interface where they see the subtitle text or they hear the voiceover, they see animation, they can click on responses, that's the view. And then the controller coordinates between the two. And most programmers are familiar with MVC, or model view controller architectures, so they're able to pick that up. So as much as you can, if you know that your tool is going to be used by programmers, use those standard patterns, like observer patterns or command patterns. And you can always find the Group of Four book and brush up on all of those patterns. If you can make things standard, make it standard. I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh, no, I'll ask a follow-up. So then, good. And then the follow-up would be, where do you find the most challenge when it's like, oh, but I need to integrate it with Unity's standards? And a lot of times, I'm sure Unity might obfuscate its code, so you don't know exactly how it's behaving on imports or something like that. So I was just curious, what part do you find the most challenging when it's like, okay, now I need to attach it to Unity, or now I need to attach it to Godot or whatever?
Right. That's a really good question. Most users are going to be working within Unity, so I try to do everything, when I'm designing for my users, which are Unity users, I try to do everything the Unity way. So as a very simple, trivial example that is actually turned into a bit of a headache, Unity uses a programming language called C#, and there is a fairly standard coding standards for C#. There are elements of a program called properties, and they encapsulate some type of data. You can get the value of a property, like the player's health, or you can set the value of a property. Maybe that property is called health. And in most C# code, the property name is capitalized, so it'll be a capital H. But Unity, for whatever reason, way back in the day, adopted lowercase letters for the beginning of properties. So in order to do everything the Unity way and make people feel comfortable with what they were doing, in fact, give them confidence that this is written the way they expect, the dialogue system for its properties uses the lowercase. Now, in this case, it's a bit of a headache because Unity, maybe 10 years, 15 years through the development of their code base, decided, oh hey, we're going to change all of our new properties to use uppercase. So the old properties that have been around forever, like the transform, which is the position of a game object, that uses lowercase. But like new properties that they've introduced for new Unity features use uppercase. I've been frankly debating whether to go uppercase or lowercase because experienced programmers coming from outside of Unity expect properties to be uppercase. Unity, like veterans, expect it to be lowercase. I don't know that answers your question, but I was venting.
The words. No, that answered it.
Any other thoughts about supporting and maintaining?
Checking in after release, like making sure that it's being used and received as intended.
That is fantastic advice. I can't tell you how many times someone will make a tool and just throw it over the fence. Do you have any tips for doing that other than just like going over to them and saying, hey, are you using it?
I generally try to be, coming from the other side, I'd say, to try to be proactive. I can think of a time that I came into a project that was very old, and they had one tool for processing images that they superseded with a new tool that was fantastic and did new stuff. And by the time I got there, it had been around for long enough that turns out nobody used it because it was unusable in the production pipeline. But for whatever reason, it was just stagnated there. And so everybody was using the old tool for everything, except for the one thing that the new tool did. And so they use it for that, holding their nose.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah. So I don't have a great solution for that, but be aware of it.
I do have one thing, and I'm going to get to. We have a few minutes left here, but it reminds me of something. If when you're making a tool, especially if it's a tool with the user interface, if you can have a button that they can always get to and easily click to report a bug, that maybe takes a screenshot and sends it along to them, or just reports like, hey, I'm confused here, some feedback form, that'll help so much.
Something along those lines I was going to say is people, especially in my experience, like artists and content designers, are very nice and don't want to tell you what's wrong with your tool.
Yes.
They don't, even if you go and ask, right? And say like, oh, are you using it? Is it doing what you want? They're like, yeah, it's great. And then they don't want to tell you all the little problems that they have with it. Abstracting that, where it's not me talking to you and you have to tell me all the things that are wrong with the thing that I need to, and instead like, here's an anonymized survey, right, that I can send to everybody and they can report that. And you don't have to have that potentially difficult conversation, I think has, in my experience, been really useful because people are more likely to tell you all the little things that they don't like about it when they don't have to say it to your face.
Excellent point. Yeah. So, yeah, don't make them tear down your tool right in front of you. Okay. So the last thing that we have just a minute or two to talk about is anyone here interested in working in tools as a business for, third-party tools essentially, making ink or making Artisy Draft or making Photoshop or making assets for the Unity Asset Store? Yeah, kind of a yes or no. We can skip over this real quick then. I found that doing so, if you do have an interest in this, is really rewarding because your tool gets used in a lot of games. And you get to meet a lot of creative people doing all kinds of crazy things. So, if that's your bent, I say go for it. It doesn't need to be a commercial tool. You can, make something free and just, like ink, see what people do with it. But always the same goal is to help those people get it done faster and more reliably. And one thing to keep in mind, if you do tools as a business, you're not working just within your own studio. You are distributing it to people all over the world who maybe don't speak whatever languages you speak or have different expectations or different time zones. So you'll want to be prepared for that. And unlike your built-in audience at your own studio, if you want people to use the tool, especially if it's commercial, you're going to have to spend some of that time like advertising, marketing, and getting the word out there about this tool. And that can be a big headache that if you're thinking about putting stuff on the Unity Asset Store or some other like, Holly Squid, is that a thing? I'm running a blank there. But anyways, marketplaces like that, it's just another headache that you might not want to deal with. In addition to managing support tickets from angry people who maybe don't have as much investment because they're not in your studio, I do recommend anytime in or out of your studio, if you get a question and you need to answer it, add it to a frequently asked questions document. That way you don't need to rewrite the same answer again and again. And when it's a business, you need to do like ownership verification, make sure that they actually own the tool, haven't pirated it, and you need to respond to reviews. You'll get some angry reviews. Most of them will feel unfair, but you gotta respond professionally anyways. That's the same with the game, you know. Plenty of people, you see like a Steam game, oh, you know, this game gets boring. And they put in like 3,000 hours in the game, you know, so you just gotta learn to be professional with that. So, that is all I have. If you're interested in Pixel Crushers, there's a QR code there. Does anyone else in the last 2 minutes that we have anything that they'd like to add?
So kind of going back to the business, how do you monetize and like assign, like say, you know, kind of the math behind like assigning a value for a tool that you're working on?
That's a $1 million question,
Yeah.
literally, right?
Yeah.
So,
Like the general thought process, you know, kind of.
yeah, I mean, you gotta find out what the market will bear. Most people, I have 2 tips. Most people undervalue their own work. So don't start out too low, but at the same time, don't start selling something at a very high price and then lower the price because your original purchasers are gonna be really upset that you've essentially ripped them off. So find something that you feel comfortable is a fair price, and then as you maintain and improve the product and keep marketing it and it gets better known, gradually increase the price. Yeah, but it'll probably end up at a point a little bit higher than you initially expect.
Yeah. I haven't looked too much into you guys' tools, but do you also do like partial free versions, and then do you see like that brings in more people to buy the full version?
Yep, great question. Pixel Crushers is one of the few tools sellers on the Unity Asset Store that offers a free evaluation version of all of our tools. And those versions don't include source code and they have a watermark, but otherwise they're fully functional. And the data is compatible between the evaluation version and the paid version. So people can like start making their game, get confidence in the tool, and then pay for the version when they need it. And I think that's a great model because it helps build confidence in the tool, which is the #1 thing that you want to do apart from being a useful tool. Okay, I think we are out of time here. Thank you everyone